The Atlanta Hawks that we know today have been a rebuilding team with Trae Young and John Collins at the centerpiece, and they just added Clint Capella with Lloyd Pierce as the head coach, who may or may not be there for the long term. But it wasn't that long ago, before these last 3 years of rebuilding, where the Atlanta Hawks were a top team in the East when they won 60 games in the regular season. The Atlanta Hawks for a while could have been best described as good, not great. You'll see them in the playoffs, but you won't see them in the conference finals or the NBA finals. The 2014-2015 season was the only time where the Atlanta Hawks would win 60 or more games in its franchise history. And this is a team that's been around since the 1950s. After spending a lot of time as assistant coach for the Spurs, Mike Budenholzer was just in his second year as head coach after taking over as head coach for the Hawks in the 2013-2014 season. Most people know him now as head coach of the Milwaukee Bucks, as he would only spend 5 seasons as head coach for the Atlanta Hawks. In just his second year as coach of the Atlanta Hawks, he would lead them to a 60-22 record in the NBA with a first seed in the Eastern Conference, and that also included a 19-game winning streak. And this was the most fun time I ever had as an Atlanta Hawks fan. One moment I remember vividly was when about mid or late January, where the Hawks were at home and played the Portland Trail Blazers back when LaMarcus Aldridge was still on the team, and they were pretty much going back and forth. And towards the end of the game, the Hawks ran away with the win, and I was very pleased. It was a very fun game to watch. The starting five consisted of Jeff Teague, Kyle Korver, Paul Millsap, DeMarre Carroll, and Al Horford. 4 of these guys were all-stars, and nobody on this team averaged more than 17 points a game. DeMarre Carroll was the only player in the starting five that was not an all-star. And as for players such as Jeff Teague and Kyle Korver, this was the only time that they would ever make the all-star in their careers, as Jeff Teague would average 16 points, 7 assists, shooting 46% from the field and 34% from 3. And as for Kyle Korver, he was pretty much just a straight-up sharpshooter, averaging 12 points, for almost having a 50-40-90 season, averaging 49% from the field and 49% from 3. Like, there would be games where he could be on the bench and then come right in and shoot like 3 straight threes in a row. Like, it would be really fun to watch. Even though this team had 4 all-star players, none of these players will make all NBA teams. And this team also had quality bench players such as Kent Bazemore, Dennis Schroeder, Mike Muscala, and Thabo Sefolosha. With the head coach coming straight from the San Antonio Spurs, the Hawks as a team played very similar to them, except for the fact that pretty much everybody on this team could at least shoot a viable three-pointer. As for team stats, the Atlanta Hawks averaged 102 points per game, which was 10th in the league. They gave up on average 97 points per game, which was 5th in the league. The pace was 15th, which was middle of the pack, at 94. The offensive rating was 109, which is 6th in the league. And the defensive rating was 103, which is also 6th in the league. So a year removed from being an 8th seed that took the Paul George Pacers to 7 games in the first round, the Atlanta Hawks were expected to have 56 wins and exceeded that by 4 in having 60 wins. They would beat both the Brooklyn Nets and Washington Wizards in 6 games each, and now they would get to the Eastern Conference Finals and play the Cleveland Cavaliers. Now here's where it gets really messed up. Despite beating the Cavaliers a couple times in the regular season, the Atlanta Hawks had now dealt with injuries so far in the playoffs and ended up getting swept by the Cleveland Cavaliers in 4 games. They would be the first #1 seed to get swept in a playoff series since the 2003 Pistons. And if they would have made it to the NBA Finals that year to play the Golden State Warriors, they would have been the first team to do that in their franchise history since the 1961 St. Louis Hawks. That season was literally peak Mike Budenholzer, and right after that season, it would literally go straight downhill. The next 2 off seasons, the Atlanta Hawks would lose both DeMarre Carroll and Al Horford, and the following year after the 2014-2015 season, they would get swept by the Cleveland Cavaliers yet again, and this time it would be in the second round. The Atlanta Hawks ended up replacing Al Horford with your very own Dwight Howard, because Horford at this point was looking for a max, and the Atlanta Hawks couldn't do that because they decided to pay Dwight Howard instead. So with that being said, Al Horford went on to go to Boston. At this point, I was very disappointed, and I myself knew that it was not going to be the same for the Atlanta Hawks. Right after the Dwight Howard signing, the Hawks would trade both Kyle Korver and Jeff Teague. They would send Korver to the Cavaliers and Jeff Teague to the Indiana Pacers. And that is how the 60-win team is no more. At this point, the only player that was a part of the 60-win team that was in the starting lineup was Paul Millsap. And just after the 2016-2017 season, he would leave Atlanta and go sign with the Denver Nuggets. The 60-win Atlanta Hawks team was without a doubt a great team back then, but the lack of a single All-NBA player cannot be looked past. And not being able to get a single win against the Cleveland Cavaliers in the playoffs, regardless of if it was LeBron, Kyrie, or Kevin Love on the team, that was very disappointing. Every sports team has their ups and downs, and with the current rebuilding of the Atlanta Hawks right now around Trae Young and John Collins, I hope to see them one day be as good or even better than that 60-win Atlanta Hawks team. Thank you for watching the video. If you like the video, like and comment, and if you like me, subscribe.